send you a picture.
Oh, thank you. You're gonna give me the signal, right?
Yes, we're good, we're live. You're all set.
All right, thank you so much. Good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's Budget Facilities meeting. It's December 5th, 2022. And we are here with a few additional guests. But to start off, we're gonna have Ms. O'Hara give us some updates from our old and new business, starting with the Sands Point Reserve, or Sand Point Reserve Land.
So, good morning, everybody. We have Mr. Matt Limstein, sorry, not Limstein. He's our attorney and he specializes in property issues. So I've asked Mr. Limstein to come and speak with us about what he's found out by the title searches and everything, because I know we did have questions about possible usage. So I have some pictures that were handed out. Do you guys have?
I think there's some extras.
So these are two pieces of property. The Guggenheim Meadow is the one on the first page. This is approximately 17 acres. So you'll see the picture where you can see this school in the front, and also next to it is the, like a map. If you look right here, this is the school, this little one here. So back here is the actual meadow that we're talking about. That's the 17 acres. So that's one area. The school is right in the front.
469.
Okay. And this is-
Meadow is
The back.
674.
This
Okay.
part is the meadow, right?
No. this part.
Oh, this part.
That's just the
Yeah, so
only
it's
part
the
that's the
small-
meadow?
Yes, that's 17 acres is the school property, and that's 17 acres is the preserve property.
So under the word road, under the word road in your
Where it
map,
says
that's where, that's.
674 is the preserve.
I can't see that number, I was like.
Oh, because we couldn't look it up.
We were just impressed. With Ryan's
So on the
vision.
next one, it's a little bigger. On the next page, this is Middle Neck Road. So you'll see this big square here with kind of a white.
Yes.
That's the piece of property we're speaking about. And next to it is a picture of the Sands Point Preserve, which is this road and gate you see there. It's undeveloped. You can't really get onto the property very easily. So
The
a lot
Middle
of
Lake
people-
property is a property that we've had the voters give us
Yes.
permission to sell.
Correct. Yes, so that's currently listed with a real estate agent. It's listed at like 2.5. But I think it may be overpriced. It may have to come to like 2 million. So, but they were also talking about, could we possibly clear some of the trees so people could drive there and actually pull up and stuff, but I'm not sure that we really want to do that yet, so. But I figured after speaking with Mr. Lansteen that maybe more.
So it's Matt Lansteen, I'm with the law firm Bond Shannon. I was asked to, I guess, do some title work. We did it on both properties, both the 17-acre parcel and the 5-acre parcel, just to see what restrictions possibly would be there on the sale, if you wanted to do something to develop it. So I guess let me just talk about the preserve first. That one, there were 2 lots, and I guess one of the lots is where the school is located. The second lot is the 17-acre parcel. Both of those were obtained, and this was years ago, 60s and 70s, from the Guggenheim Foundation. And at least as to the 17-acre parcel, which I guess isn't as important in today's discussion, that one does have a deed restriction that says the property still needs to be used for educational purposes. So I guess at any point, if there's a thought of selling, developing, you'd have to go back and revisit that, and that could mean even going back to the foundation to see if you could get the restriction removed. But it was a very simple one-liner in a 1970s deed that's there, so need to keep that in mind. On the other parcel, the 5-acre parcel, so when it was acquired actually from the US government, and this now also dates back to the really 60s and 70s, and there were a couple of deeds that were involved. When it was originally bought or acquired from the government, there were significant restrictions that were put into that deed, which said you had to use it in essence for educational purposes. But there was a time restriction on it of 30 years. So that deed was actually done September 1st, 1971, and 30 years later, obviously, the time period has expired. The school district in the 90s actually, at some point, I guess, went back to the government and took a parcel having to do with I guess there's a museum next door. Right, where they actually got the government to waive that restriction for a couple of bucks. And this was now years ago. But the good news is the time period on that has expired. The only thing that I will tell you though that's in there that didn't expire is back in the 60s when the government did the deed, there's a provision in there that says the government can come in at any time and use the property for emergency purposes. And
Grass.
right, so I mean, as the 60s, my thought was, be it, who knows what they were really
To get
thinking.
down to the water, I think it was from the Navy, and it's to get down. and
Exactly.
Get the ships out, because we're gonna go to war. and the ships.
Right, however, that restriction it's still there.
Right.
So from a practical standpoint, if the thought was to try and go and sell this property, someone buying it would say, it would have probably, it's what's called, in my world, it's called a clout on title. You really would want to try and get that removed if you could, in order to make it more marketable, because somebody, whatever the thought's going to be to develop, if it was going to be, or just residential, for example, probably doesn't want to have that restriction overlaying its property. So that is still out there and was survived past that 30-day period. So that to me was the one issue and the one concern as to the 5-acre parcel.
Can I ask a question? So what happens if the school district sells this property? Does it come with the restrictions?
Right, so it's a good question. So these restrictions are all binding on successors and assigns. So practically how it would probably play out is you go to contract with the third party. Third party's gonna do a similar title search to what I did. We'll see that restriction and we'll either say, fine, not an issue, what's the likelihood and all that, or may come back to the school district to say, listen, again, I'll use the word clout on title, that's something that you need to get removed. And again, it's from the US government, so this obviously would be a bit of a process and I would think a time to try and get that resolved, which, if you're in the early stages, maybe starting conversations with the US government, which was done 20, 30 years ago when they took off a little piece from it. But it's out there, and it's, again, a buyer, depending on their use, would come back to you and say that's an issue.
So but the village of Sands Point, because this property now is in the village of Sands Point, the village of Sands Point, do they have any sort of,
Jurisdiction.
jurisdiction on this?
It's
Like what happens?
Yeah, so that's a different, I mean, that's a
That's been
local,
the question that we've been given by community members who may be interested in the property is, well, we don't know that we want it because we still have to deal with the village, and the village is not gonna tell us what we can and cannot do.
right.
So what happens then?
So that's a different issue than the one I'm raising. That's really a ZOCO,
Right.
so it's a zoning local development kind of issue. What can we do with the property? This is strictly a title issue, so it's, and again, you wouldn't be going to Sands Point, you'd be going to the US government, who is the entity that actually deeded the property back in the 60s and 70s.
If the school district wanted to develop this property, if we wanted to use it, so we didn't sell it, do we have to deal with the village of Sands Point?
You probably would, yes, from a development standpoint.
So in terms like not to say that that's what we would use this for, but if we're looking for a place, say, to expand our transportation, and we wanted to put buses here on that 5 acres, would we be restricted?
Well, you wouldn't be from a title perspective, right? So title, you'd be okay, and you probably would maybe even say, you know what, I'll do it even with that restriction about what's the land the US government's coming in here to take over or possess the property. You'd still have to deal with, the village and local laws about what you can develop, but from a title perspective, you'd be able to do that.
I was under the impression that because the district owned the property and that it was gifted to us for educational purposes, if the district wanted to put their buses on there, we, for instance, as an example, we wouldn't be limited by the Village of Sands Point.
From a zoning perspective?
Yeah.
That may be the case, that I don't know. This was, I
We
really
just
only looked
purely
at
looked at title.
at the title issue, yes.
Well, and that restriction is over,
Correct.
right? So, yes.
Well, I think there's a difference though, I mean, maybe this is another question that we need to ask to go back. So I think there's a difference between is the restriction on the deed in a way that restricts us versus how is this piece of land gifted and what is the zoning of the piece of land when it is gifted and does that still pertain? Because I was under the impression from the last time we asked this question to Emily is that if we used it for educational purposes, we had no problems. The problem was with buyers and what they would be able to do with it, which was different.
Right.
We should definitely confirm that.
Right, but in just, so zoning and title. On the title side where the restriction is, that educational purpose restriction expired.
No, I got it, I
Right,
got it.
so that's right.
Right, so I'm saying, I understand that piece in terms of how we would want to use it and whether it can be sold is gone for us. But I think it's a separate question from whether or not we would have the same zoning restrictions
As any
as
third party.
any
Right.
third party that we
Right.
sold it to.
Right.
But that only matters if we think that we're gonna keep it for some time.
Right.
Although maybe it matters in terms of whether we want to discuss if we want to keep it for something too.
There's also, I believe it was East Williston, they had put a fence up and they said we're not subject to local zoning because we're going through SED approved it. And it came back that actually you do have to go by the local zoning, so.
So do we know how this piece of property is currently zoned?
It's zoned for residential, but we couldn't sell it to someone to break off
Right.
and sell. But as far as the specific zoning, I don't know. Like, is there a way we could?
Okay, so yes,
I know it's zoned so that it can't be subdivided, which is part of the reason people might not want to buy it. It's residential, one chunk. But
No, I think it's residential, it's under one block and lot, I think the question has been, by others, because it's 5 acres, could they chip down? I think the problem is going to the village and asking for the village, but, so I guess the
I
real
thought there was
question.
some Sands Point, like the last time we discussed this, I thought that it was that Sands Point, everybody was under the
I
impression
agree
Sands
with
Point would not be allowed.
Yes, yes,
Right,
yes, yes.
and so,
We've never had a conversation, to my
We've never
knowledge,
had a buyer for real.
We've never had a buyer for real, we've never had a conversation about the real zoning with the village or whomever we would have to speak to, right, in those regards, these are all been impressions. I think the issue today is we do have this one blemish on our title that I don't know, have our realtors brought this up as being an impediment to the sale of the land,
Have
so.
they been showing it? I guess I'm curious about that.
They had 2 people inquire about it, but they
Okay.
said it's very, they feel like we made the price too much, too high
Or
for.
aren't they the
But are they
ones who
worried?
gave us the price?
But yeah, we do talk about it, but I guess that, I mean, the market's changing.
Yes, yes.
So, but they have been asking me for a little while to, could we look at the price and do we want to do something else with it, so.
sorry,
Go ahead.
in terms of the cloud on the title, do we know if that restriction still exists on the Sands Point Preserve property? 'Cause I'm assuming that was on both pieces of property when the government deeded them, right?
No, because the preserve was deeded by the Guggenheim Foundation, so it was a private transfer. The only thing the Guggenheim Foundation put in was the restriction about educational purposes.
So
So,
there's no time limit though.
so, no, I understand that. I mean, I'm just thinking in terms of like how likely it would be to have the government give this up. And I don't really understand the restriction anymore then because this property doesn't have any access to the water without going over the Sands Point Preserve.
So wait, though, I just want to clarify for just a second, he answered your question in regards to Guggenheim Meadow. So
Oh.
she's talking about the actual Sands Point Preserve. So remember,
Museum.
this Middle Neck Road property is at the entrance of the Sands Point Preserve property. And so she's asking if the Sands Point Preserve property also has the same
Same
restriction on their title,
Thank you for
correct?
the clarification.
Yes.
Now we're on the same page. I was thinking, as the government, why would you want this restriction on
Right.
these 5 acres without the 200 plus acres
That really
that
lead
the
to the
Sands
water,
Point
right,
Preserve
yes.
has?
So the short answer is, we didn't do the survey,
Okay.
but more likely than not, I'm sure they probably do.
Yes,
I would
I mean,
think.
And really, it's a curiosity question in
Right.
terms of assessing whether the government would want to give this up.
Right, so it's interesting, to back to when, in 1994, when the school district actually took a chunk and got it back, the government in that document that got recorded said specifically that this emergency was a cloud on title and removed it as to that little piece. And that was in the 90s, so maybe perspective is different. I mean, this is 20 years
Which
ago.
little piece of land is that?
It would- they would-
Remind us?
they-
Somewhere on here.
The access road to the Sands Point Preserve.
Oh.
It was 12,000 square feet, it was called the Gatehouse parcel.
Okay.
So they removed it from the road, but not from the heavily wooded parcel.
Correct. Well, because they were, yeah,
Because you couldn't access their property until that road was, it's like a flag lot, right?
Right.
So they were, that road was changing hands at that point.
Right.
Interesting, okay.
So I guess, so going back to this question, so we have we took two issues, right? We have a title issue and we have a potential zoning issue, but right now the property is up for sale.
I think
And-
more is, I'm sorry to interrupt you, I think the issue is the price of the property.
Well, I'm getting
What are
to
we
that,
doing?
yes, so that's the question is, all I'm hearing right now is only any of the interested parties are having a problem with the price of the property, not with the cloud on the title, is that correct?
That, they do know that there is a cloud on the title. I don't know that the prospective buyers know that. The
Oh.
realtors definitely know that, and I would think that they put it out there too.
Okay,
Can I ask another question, Kathy? Do you have any other recommendations? So I guess when the school district put this up for vote and it was a long time ago, things have changed. Do you now believe that and I guess for you too, Brian, I think so, because we have new people now at the district from the time that we put it up for sale. Do you think that it'd be best if the district did not sell this property and that we used it for our own purposes? I guess the question I have, and it was a question that was put out to the voters back then, and it still kind of exists. This is property that the school district owns that is just sitting there. Can we make better use of it, and is that better use selling it? Or is it better use using it for our facilities per se, or, I mean, we've talked about different things. So maybe that's the bigger question that I think we should be asking, as opposed to, do we, worry about the cloud on the title?
I think that's something that needs to be a discussion with the board, to have their input, not something for me to decide. I think that looking at the zoning and what possibilities we could do, like what could we actually do with this piece of property, then we can better assess.
so have we looked, yeah, we can do that, have we looked at what we can do with this property, or Brian?
Brian, you've
Well,
only been here for a
I
few minutes.
think it's more contingent on the zoning.
Right, and I was
Right, so
gonna
we need to
say
ask that
that
question.
whether it's you or even a third party, because I deal with a lot of developers, this is my life, and I can see someone coming in maybe saying the value's too high, because the biggest issue, especially on Long Island, is how long is it gonna, first of all, can you develop it?
Right.
That's question one. Assuming you can develop it, how long is it going to take you to do that? And Long Island's always the issue of, so if the village is gonna be an impediment, that immediately may take people off the table without looking at it. So I think the analysis for you, whether it's gonna be keeping the property or selling it, is to get some sense on the zoning, and I'm sorry that I would, some sense on the zoning to see what you can either do, or what's the possibility for potential, people coming and buying it. And then I think you'd be in a better place to make a decision. I mean, you may, who knows what they're telling, and I understand, that you think possibly there may be an exemption because it's the school district to do certain things, but who even knows if that's, someone, either needs to dive into the zoning code or even talk to one or two of the local people to find out exactly what the potentials are for that property.
So for this committee, I'm gonna see, you're just gonna make a suggestion for this committee. For this committee, considering we still have open issues, are you guys with that? Are you okay with that course of action? Is maybe we need to have the next parcel of people come as the update on zoning and have that discussion so that we can really make an informed decision.
I think we should get an update on zoning and then take it to the general board, once we get the update on zoning.
Yes.
And go to the all 7 board members and have a discussion at a board meeting
I agree.
about what are we doing, what are the possibilities with this property.
I agree. I also, though, at the time that we take it to the board, I would also recommend, if we're all in agreement, that maybe we've had our buildings and facilities team look at it as well to make sure and see and consider and say, you know, understanding if we didn't have any zoning restrictions and we could do what we wanted to, yes, this would be more valuable for us to keep than to sell. I think that having some of that
Absolutely.
information in hand also would be helpful, Rachel.
An additional suggestion on top of that, I mean, I absolutely think we need a zoning answer. So that we have that as like a framework, but pre-pandemic, so now this is probably 2019 and heading into 2020, we had a subcommittee at the budget committee that was discussing, or really just barely starting to discuss this property and
Maybe it's
what
a
is, or what to do with it, right? It got
Right,
cut off.
right.
But I think that we should think about reforming that if this is something that we seriously wanna think about keeping, because I think it could be facilities use, but it also could be a curricular use. That
So,
we use
Rachel,
for
so is it
extracurricular
process wise though,
use.
we should get the
The
zoning
zoning
Yes,
first,
and then
we'll
also-
show it to the board first, and
Right.
at the board meeting, we can
I mean, I
have that
think in
discussion.
order to
Yes.
form a subcommittee, we would want the board approval.
Yeah,
Yes, yes, yes.
we can have that
I think that's-
discussion at the board
That's,
level.
yeah, I agree. I think this is all part of the same process. And yes, so I agree.
Maybe this committee, I think, is recommending a course of action, which to
Yes.
me should be have the zoning looked into, hear more
From the
from our
facilities and the
facilities and
potential
from Ms. O'Hara.
stuff.
And if they have any further opinions, and then maybe form a subcommittee, I think the board needs to approve that
Yeah.
course of action, absolutely.
That's what we will be bringing as a recommendation at tomorrow's meeting, if everyone's in agreement.
Yes.
All right.
So,
Okay,
I
Yes,
have some,
yes.
so Matt, is that something you could assist us with?
yeah, we can
This
do,
on-
yes.
Okay.
Excellent.
So you can speak to the town.
Yeah, the first bit, speak to them, look at the code and, come back to you with an answer. Okay.
Well, you get to revisit us then. That's
There you go.
exciting. We're so happy.
All right, am I dismissed?
Yes.
You are,
Sorry,
oh,
I
yes,
do
go
have
ahead.
more questions
Yeah, sure.
about the Guggenheim.
Okay.
Yes.
So if this is the 17 acres, so we could actually, if we needed a hunk of that, like 5 acres or 10 acres, we could do whatever we like with this as long as it's educational based.
From the title perspective, right.
But the zoning will be still potentially an issue because it's in Sands Point. Isn't it still also in Sands
Yeah,
Point?
you probably still have the zoning issue, and again, the educational portion, if you decide you want to do something different, then you have to go back, I think we could go back to the foundation of whoever the successor is now to try and get that removed. But
Okay.
it'll be the
But I
same
mean,
analysis.
We don't need to have it removed as long as it was something to do with education.
Right,
We don't want to
right.
sell
Correct.
off, right, we just want to maybe. do
Is it worthwhile that while Matt is looking into the Middle Neck Road property from a zoning perspective, we also look at the Guggenheim Meadow
Yes.
from a zoning
Yes.
perspective, just so we have all of our answers,
Yes, if that's possible.
if that's possible?
And I know the state, Kathy mentioned it, I know the state is still working on that as well, because for hundreds of years, schools
Yeah,
were
it doesn't
exempt
matter
from
what
local
the
zoning. All of our schools are not, in compliance with village and town codes because they got their building permits and their zoning codes from SCD. So this, over a $900 fence has really caused a lot
Right,
of fallout. And the state has upheld it so far, but
They
it's,
upheld to go through the zoning.
that you have to go through the
Right,
local,
right.
but there's a lot of fallout from that because none of the existing buildings meet
Right.
those
So
local
is that
codes. So that is still being
that
discussed.
is recent?
Yes.
Within the last 2 years.
It happened
Maybe
right before COVID, so,
Wow.
And is that being relooked at, is that being appealed, I don't know what the
Yes,
process is.
so as per the organization I belong to, we have legislative, we donated, but we focused on this issue because it does affect so many school districts and we're trying to fight it. I don't know what will be successful.
I think there's a lot of
It seems like
advocacy
it-
for it, and I think that
We
if
have to
anything, there's gonna be
yeah.
better clarification, because again, if you say that that's for new projects, that's
Right.
one thing, but
So
is everything else
wouldn't
grandfathered in?
that also be something we should maybe suggest that the legislative task force gets involved in, if this is a legislative issue now?
It is, but maybe we should see if we have this as an issue. We don't even know.
And we do, if the law gets upheld, all school districts are
I guess.
affected by it.
I guess, if they're ruling that this is one case though, they haven't ruled for this way and, right, for
Right,
multiple
but
cases.
it definitely has legs, like they're gonna say that it seems like
Right.
to me that the local
I
zoning,
think this
they're
is
saying
something we
should
should
trump.
take to the
Yeah,
legislature.
they're using
Alright,
this as a benchmark.
I think
All
maybe tomorrow, Julie, we can ask the legislature task force if they would, I know that we, on a separate meeting, we do have another meeting, we have a meeting set up with our assemblywoman, right?
Yeah.
So I think we should ask
We'll do that.
that it be looked at.
Yes,
Can
Rachel?
you send us some information on that,
Mhm.
please, Wilson case? And then also, I think while we're looking at zoning, maybe next time if we can talk a little bit more about this interplay between the title and the zoning issues, because I was under the potentially false impression, but I think Emily was under the same impression from our previous conversations, that there was an impact in the way some of these things were deeded that pulled us out of this zoning category, at least prior to the East Williston case.
It might be what
I think
Brian's
it's because
talking
of the
about.
East
that-
Williston
yeah, the-
case.
Yeah, I think that's why things
That
are
we're
changing.
saying
That's
that's
what's
not
changed, the East Williston
So
case.
I think we need to understand that, because I'm hearing title and zoning are totally separate from our attorney now. But I guess like we need to understand what the impact is. Is it just the East Williston or?
Yeah, I'll take a
From
look.
my knowledge, that was the first case that really came up, and that's why so many school districts were going after this, because they realized just getting the projects approved, it takes so long at state ed. So now this is a whole nother layer of bureaucracy.
It also
and
really
stuff.
doesn't make any sense, right? Because we already have the New York State Education Department as the layer that is overseeing all the issues that a
Right.
zoning department would be overseeing on buildings, right? So you're doing something really.
Right, and
it's
if
for
that's- if
school
that's the
districts,
case, then
right?
we should be
Right.
able
Then we
to
should be
not-
advocating it.
If we're gonna go by zoning, then we should say, forget SCD's requirements, and we should do
Which
it.
was right,
It
exactly,
doesn't-
right,
it doesn't
exactly,
make sense.
exactly, exactly.
I mean, that's just, you can't have, it's a two, okay.
It doesn't
All right.
make sense.
So we're good, we have a lot more to discuss today, not that I don't find this worthwhile, but we're gonna table it. We have a few action plans, Mr. Livingston, thank you for
Thank you.
joining
Thank you.
us. We really
I will
appreciate
be
you, all
back
your
to you.
questions.
Thank you.
All right, so that was some old business that will be tabled as old business again. So thank you for bringing that, Kathy, to our attention. And now we're gonna move into some new business, which has to deal with an update on this star exemption.
Sure. So back in September, there was some legislation signed where we currently offer a star enhanced exemption for property holders who are over 65, if they're disabled or they have limited income. There is a sliding scale based on the income level. This new legislation changes that income scale. So you would have, I believe there's 551 exemptions currently in our district to receive the enhanced star. So there is a percent that receives 50%, which I believe it was 91 parcels. So the potential is the 457 who are only receiving like 5% or 10% or 15%. This new, by opting into it, it would allow everybody to get 50%. To assess the impact, you can't really do that right now because you have to wait until April when they actually send out the different bills. And you'll see they're offering, the county is offering it and many of the villages are. So there's a deadline by January 2nd for school districts to opt into this. A lot of school districts are up in the air because we don't have the full picture of this. So I bring this to the board just to make you aware of it. At first I was thinking it would be a good thing for us to opt into, but then looking at it, I don't see what the rush would be, because if you don't opt into it now, you can actually opt into it next year. So it's not like your hands are tied. I think we'd have a better picture of what the impact would be to other taxpayers. And just to clarify what the issue might be is, when you offer an exemption, you're shifting the tax burden from one group of taxpayers to other people. It's basically a pie, which is the tax levy. And we're either having this big a piece or bigger. So that's really the issue. And without understanding the full impact, I've computed that by a minimum, it would be about 30,000 that would be shifted in assessments.
Overall, 30,000.
Overall.
So what does that mean, 30,000 in assessments? What does
In
that turn to
assessments.
come out to in like a dollar value?
Right, so that's something I can't establish yet.
Till
because-
April.
Yes, yeah, because there's actually, it could be more than the 30,000 in assessed value. So you would take 30,000 and times it by our tax rate, which is like, I think 1.7 around there, thousand times per thousand, so.
That's a lot of math for me,
Yes,
Kathy, you know
yes.
that.
So I think it's best to wait until April unless somebody is very,
Have we heard from any cities? I mean, I guess
other schools.
the other question is, it's really a benefit for our senior citizens, right?
Yes.
And it's more of a benefit for our senior citizens who would even qualify. So it's
And
even
persons with
another layer,
disabilities
right?
also.
It's persons with disabilities. So have we heard from any of them? You know, I understand that the county may be doing it and the towns may be doing it, but the biggest bulk of all our taxes, as we know, are the school taxes. So I don't want it to have a negative impact on our citizens who need it the most. That's why I was asking you,
So I think-
what is the dollar value? What does it come out to? Like, what would we be shifting over? Is it, $100,000 or is it $5,000? I don't know the number.
I have like an impact report and it shows you who receives the star. So there's 551 people who are receiving the enhanced star.
Okay.
So most of the people who do need it are receiving it now, like these are the people who applied for it.
And we get it either way, this would not
But
affect.
not
They're
at the
not
same
getting
level.
the same
Right.
level. They
Some
might
of them are
only-
getting,
Well,
only 91 persons are getting 50%.
So
More
there's
than we get.
94 people who are receiving like this additional senior exemption. Of the 94, 74 of them are already at the 50%. So you have 20 people who potentially
20
this could,
Okay.
yes, this could impact. But what they're doing is they're changing the low income from 32, I think, 32.9 to 52. So is that a big impact? I don't really think it's huge because 52 is.
I mean,
is-
37,399 to 58,399,
Right.
that's the income requirements for the
Yes.
allowable.
So
income
they're
requirements.
raising the floor
Right,
basically.
right.
So it's, a lot of our seniors are already getting the full 50%.
Mhm.
So you're talking about another 20 that we know of. So the
But
big
would the
unknown,
raising of the number change anything from the
It may.
58?
It may.
it may, because if you make more.
So it may bring in more than the 94 that are already there, but we don't know
Yes.
how many.
Correct.
This is so government
Yes.
to tell people, here you go.
And you have to
say-
Here are the
information.
20 variables.
And
we're not
you have
gonna
till
tell you
January
any of that.
2nd to decide.
Well, let's be very clear, you have January 2nd to decide for this year. What Kathy's very clearly saying is that if we decide we want to take the time, which to analyze this information, there should be a discussion that then if we opt not to move forward in January, that we look at this information after April and analyze this as a direction we would want to look at to see what the impact is.
Just to clarify, if we don't opt in right now, the income, floor that's set at 32, whatever, it stays there, our numbers stay all the same, and then we can opt in for next year.
No, the 58 changes.
The
Anyway.
58 changes
No,
anyway.
that's only if we
If
opt
we
into
opt
this.
Oh, only if we opt
So
in.
if we do nothing this year, if we do not opt in, nothing changes for any of our residents in regards to this exemption, is that correct?
Unless they apply for the exemption or things in their situation change, but.
Okay.
Yeah.
But
No,
for
it does
these-
change. Wait, I'm sorry, it does change, because if we don't opt in, you can only get enhanced star if you're making 32,000, correct?
No, I think the senior, you get an enhanced star, but the senior exemption and the
Yes.
low income and
Only
this is
if,
in
only if
addition
you're
to
at
that.
32. But if we opt in and you get this senior if you're at 58.
You can actually get either 5%, 10%, 20%.
You won't
or
get the
50.
increase.
You won't get the 50%.
Right, so it does affect us. It does not, we can't make a statement that if we don't opt in, it doesn't affect people.
It doesn't
No,
change
it
their,
doesn't
I'm saying it doesn't
change what
change. I'm not
happens on
saying,
ours.
I'm not.
It does affect people.
Right, it does
100%.
affect people, I'm just saying it doesn't change how we currently operate or anything that has happened from ours. We're not taking it, we're not losing anything, we're not gaining anything, right?
Right.
The individual taxpayer, we don't know how many, right, that would qualify for this, have something that they will maybe not be able to take advantage of. That's the difference, correct?
And we're discussing this tomorrow night.
Right, well, we will bring it up as a.
Isn't it a resolution? Is the potential
No,
resolution
there's
on?
It's not on the
resolution.
agenda, we'll bring it up as part of a discussion to
Oh,
have.
I thought we were being told that we were putting it on. I thought I saw a copy of
There
the
was-
potential resolution.
there was you to review the potential of that resolution. My understanding that it may come up on the future, whether it was coming up tomorrow or in a future meeting, is to get
We don't have a
determined.
meeting, a board meeting.
We could always
so
schedule
I
another
think we
board
need-
meeting.
Okay.
But regardless, I think that this presentation as part of the Budget and Facilities Committee update will be made, and Kathy can explain it, what the implications are. Do we as a committee have a feeling one way or another about what we would like to do? Yes, Rachel?
So, I know this is very, very hard to analyze. Do we have the numbers of who qualifies for the 5%, the 10%, whatever, and what the income levels are there? And from what we have from last year at those qualification levels, are we able to sort of take a guess at how many of them would go into the 50%?
Yes, all of them will go into the 50%. So
Right,
That's
everyone, but the
all.
question was how many is that
Additional.
additional? Right now we have, right.
But isn't the additional in the, you said we have
551.
the 551, do we have numbers on those people?
That's what the unknown is. I don't know what their income level is. So if I knew what all of their income level was now, I looked at things
Right.
like maybe
Right.
25% of the people would qualify, 50% might qualify. You could have as much as 4.1 million in a shift compared to
Oh, that's a
20.
big
That's a
Right.
big number.
So
So
these
that
are
was-
huge,
that was
right,
my
which is a
question.
huge number to be dealing with when we have so
So
many
I think that's the
unknowns.
information we need to discuss on, yeah.
That's what-
I'm
that's
very,
why-
I'm very
So
mixed.
the problem is if we
Right.
had any of that data and we knew it was an X
Right.
amount of 100 people,
Right.
right, and the cost would be X. I mean, I think, I have a feeling, Emily's feeling the same thing. $58,000 in income is not a high income, right? Like this tax break will have an impact on these families.
Right.
But if it's a potential unknown swing in tax burden of $5 million to everybody else, that's a huge unknown. Now I understand why you're
And
saying.
that's why
wait.
initially I thought, because I had this, that it was a shift to 28.6, and I was like, oh, it's very minimal, and it may just be that, but there is a
But we still don't
possibility
know.
it could be 1 million, 2 million, 3 or 4. So
And there is,
that's not something I think we want to really do right now. I think it's better to wait until April to say, okay,
and they
Can you
have
go
said that,
back?
so it's no.
So let me ask
there's
you a question, is it possible if we wait until April, and I don't know the answer, can you
That's
apply
exactly
for
right.
like retro, like if
Yeah,
I
there's
was in
no
that
way.
household, could I go back? It's only
No.
going forward.
it's January 2nd is the deadline. So we would have to tell the assessor's office that we do want to opt into it prior to January 2nd. So all the school districts are in the same situation we are, saying, what are you doing? Are you offering it? Are you not offering it? You know what, everyone's looking
And
at
do you
each
know what
other.
and what are people saying for the most part? Nobody's made a decision yet, do you know of, correct?
People aren't really saying because they don't know what their board's gonna do. So like, somebody's trying to do a survey of our surrounding districts to see this. This was last week, I still haven't seen responses from that. So some people do wanna hold off, they're recommending holding off because then you'll know the income level because the town will have all of that because they're offering it.
Is there,
So then we go better look at
just last question, is there any way to request from the assessor's office this information on the income of that 450? So
They
I'm assuming
have, yes, so
that's the population, that number wouldn't get bigger, it's how many of those people would qualify. Right.
Yeah, so ASBO, there's like a Nassau chapter of ASBO. They wrote a letter to the assessor's office, the deputy assessor, asking for that information. And that's why I have some of the information I do now that was received November 23rd. So we can't specifically know, we can't get that information yet. We have to wait till April 23rd to
Till the
find
The
out.
town
does
doesn't know, because the town doesn't even
That's
really
the
know the
assessment.
information,
But the
right?
town
Which is-
knows
they know
as
enough.
of last year.
They should,
Right,
yes,
the town
yes.
has this information as of last year, and
Do they?
yeah, of course, right?
Would
Well,
you,
they
would the
have-
change
The
of
change in the
50,000
income,
Do they?
I
How
mean,
much
they,
have they?
in that 450
How do you know if
people-
it's 30,000? I mean, they know, I think, that they've qualified, but do they know that they can qualify now with the 50?
right, at the
I mean, if they're
58,000.
having people, those 550 people have reported their income in order to qualify for STAR, right?
But you have the Office of Real Property Services up at the state level.
Oh, forget it.
Yes, yeah, now we're, yes.
Then you have the local
There's no way
assessor's
anybody knows.
office.
Either way,
Oh, so does
They
that,
asked
that
for it.
income,
It has to come from the
Yes.
local.
I think Orbs probably grants the income and sends it to the town and says you have this many parcels that qualify, who applied for it and did it correctly.
so can I just make
So
a,
it's the state level that would have the income levels.
I believe, I
But
don't
it's, I
understand
mean,
the whole
look, the
process.
thing that we can't take it, we can't forecast what are some of these income levels that change, right? If they provide us the information from last year, you could give us a much more educated guess on what this impact would be.
The problem is we have till
So-
January
till
2nd.
January
and
2nd
our
to make
meeting is
all of
tomorrow,
this, right?
so-
So here's my recommendation, if you guys are in agreement with this. I think this should be a conversation at tomorrow's meeting, especially when we're discussing, the updates from this meeting. What I'd like to see is Kathy's already provided the board with some of the information. Kathy, if you could provide these numbers for the board that you're talking about, as far as you started off at a $28,000 amount, but then you were saying we're looking at upwards of $1 million, if we do it this way, 2 million, 3 million, 4 million. If you can provide that information, as well as maybe just a few bullets on what you have done and what Nassau County has done to tell us, to answer kind of some of the questions Rachel and Emily were asking, just so we can have some of those bases covered and the board can be informed prior to the discussion, so that we're going into it a little more
Because doesn't the
prepared.
board have to make a decision collectively on whether or not we're passing? I'm confused why
The
this
board-
isn't on the agenda for tomorrow night.
I'm not in charge of the agenda.
No, I know
so-
that. I'm like, do we have to have a decision? Like, if we as a
We as
board
a
are
board
making a
will need
decision.
to, or we
We could
could.
potentially say, we wanna wait and see if we get more
Right.
information, but then we need to schedule
Well,
a
an
special
emergency,
meeting.
a special
We need to
meeting,
have
right.
that discussion tomorrow night.
Yes,
Yes.
yes, so that's
I
what
think
we're
we are
going to,
discussing
we
it
are
tomorrow.
going, so,
Only
is,
because we're bringing it up.
well, again, is everyone in this committee in agreement
Yes.
that this is the path to go? Is everyone in this committee in agreement that what I've asked Kathy to
Yes,
provide in
yes.
addition to what we already have is enough information?
I have one last question. I'm assuming that once we opt in, we cannot opt out, right?
Oh, good question.
Oh, that's a good question, I imagine the case is true.
I've never had that question, so we would have to ask the town assessors. I wouldn't think you could opt out, but.
I would think that it's like join or don't join.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah, I mean, I guess take a look at all your exemptions. I don't know how that would work.
Okay,
Okay.
that's a good question. All right, let's see how excited we are today.
So
We
much.
got a lot of work.
We got a lot of work. Okay, so it's 9:44 and we're never gonna finish this whole agenda by 10 o'clock, so we're gonna go to our Kathy, I think you were saying, the financial forecast and planning is you want a little more time, especially.
Yes, until like February.
Till February?
Because there's so many, I was looking at the projections and trying to project different expenses, and also the revenue. I think I'll have a clearer picture when the state has their state aid runs, to look at that, and also looking at utilities and just our health insurance. There's a very large increase to health insurance and things, so I think would be a better picture.
So is it all right if we move this agenda item to February based on that recommendation? So we'll make that change. And now we're gonna move over to Mr. Graham, and he's gonna update us on our old business conversation about energy performance contracts.
So we have 4 meetings coming up in the next couple of weeks, myself and Ms. O'Hara, with a lot of different ESCOs and entities and looking at what our
So can
available
you
as
just
options are.
refresh everyone what an ESCO is?
Energy service company, so that's typically who you would do an EPC through. So the district is engaged with a current EPC with Johnson Controls. That was started in 2004, updated in 2017. So we're really doing an analysis of that to find out, what was done, what was not done, where we're at with those upgrades, and if anything is due for further upgrade. Again, as we talk about, as technology changes and more efficient means become available, what was recommended, what was left off, and then we're also looking to bring in other EPC or ESCO companies and have them do a true assessment of the district, and again, see why some of the decisions were made in those two previous energy performance contracts. We do feel that there's a lot of opportunity, but we want to vet that out with multiple vendors and make sure we're getting the best value. All of those meetings are set up over the next couple of weeks. First one is tomorrow.
Okay. And then between now and the end of the calendar year, or,
Yes.
okay. And can you tell the difference again, an ESCO and an EPC, there are different
An
differences between
EPC
them,
is an
correct?
energy performance
Contract.
contract that you enter into typically with an ESCO, which
With
is
an
an
ESCO.
energy service company. It doesn't have to be an ESCO. Districts do them directly through their architects or
Architects,
through
yes.
contractors. There's advantages to both, and depending on what the project curtails is, where we'll make our recommendation on which route to go.
So then you're looking at both energy performance, or these, like
ESCOs.
ESCOs, and you're also looking at whether we should use our architects.
Sure,
when
if,
we're looking to go
depending
there.
on what the assessment,
Okay.
what's available to us, then we would make a recommendation on how best to pursue it, what the better value is.
Okay, sounds
So
great.
Brian, we would first consult with the ESCO and get their opinion on what type of projects we could actually do.
Yes.
And then if they're smaller, that's when we might opt to go for like an architect to oversee it. So the benefit of going with the ESCO is that they really, this is their thing. They know how to put things through. And also.
You get a lot of support
Like the
with the
law
ESCO, you
larger.
get project management with the ESCOs. Again, we are in a little bit of a unique situation where we have a current energy performance contract, and we're gonna look at, whether we reevaluate that like we did in 2017, or start with a separate, entity and an ESCO. So we would definitely bring in the ESCOs first. We would have them do their assessments. It doesn't cost us anything. There's no obligation. It's why wouldn't we want the experts to look at that and really give us opinions and options. And then us as a committee and as a district can assess those assessments and make a determination on whether it's worth it to go for a full energy performance contract or to pull out certain projects
Right.
and then do it directly through an architect and engineer with the contractor directly.
Oh, so, and then in regards to that, the meetings that you're having with the ESCOs, it's not through a formalized RFP process, is it? It's just, you're just talking to them to kind of understand what they would be looking at with what we have currently, right?
Sure, we're
Initial
starting off, we're
assessment.
really assessing the EPC that was done, that we're in the middle of right now, and finding out again why some of those decisions were made to do certain things, to not do other things, what has changed in those last 5 years, and what's available now that wasn't available 5 years ago. So it's really an assessment of where we're at, our current utilities, and our current EPC. That will then help us cater a new EPC to what's available to us.
Okay. And do you have an idea after meeting, I know you're meeting with them, you said between now and the end of the calendar year, do you have an idea of when you'll be able to at least update the board or make a recommendation to this committee about the direction you want to go? Is this a January thing? Is it a February thing?
I think February,
February?
probably by the time we turn over our utility information, they will definitely need a couple of weeks to dissect that as well. I think we'll be able to make a much better informed report in February.
And how many ESCO companies? Is really just two that you know, or is it four?
Well,
Or 4
we're meeting
meetings,
with Johnson
4 meetings,
Controls
okay.
as our current EPC. We talked about Energia, bringing them in for an assessment, dealing directly with the architect, involving Mr. Grillo and his recommendation, and potentially another EPC company.
Okay. Any other questions from the committee?
I do have a question. How often, and is it So we renewed with Johnson in 2017. Is it a time period? Like, is it a 10-year? Like, what, we went from 2004, you said?
2004 was the initial signing. In
Agreed.
2017, in 2014, I think you agreed to
I don't
Up in
remember as far back as
2017.
14. I don't remember anything about 2004, I remember 14.
It depends on what's available. Again, as technology evolves and lighting and controllers and water conservation technology becomes more available, there's an opportunity to save greater energy. But in order to save that energy and recoup the value, you have to be able to replace what you already
So
replaced.
would
There has to be a minimum of a 17-year payback. So you gotta be above
I
that.
got it. But do we need to stay with Johnson, Johnson Control? Like, are we bound by a contract?
Are we in a contract?
That was my, yeah.
That we're
that's
stuck,
like
are we,
an
how long are we with that?
But we're in an energy performance contract.
Or can we
with
move
them.
anytime?
How long?
We can move, we have to make sure the value is there, that we're not
Right,
still,
I got that.
and that's part of the assessment.
Okay,
is
got
to
it,
determine if we've reached enough payback on the utilities and the fixtures that are in, that we can remove them, or that we still need to capture some of that payback and we can't change them out with a more efficient item.
So it's like, it's like a treasury bond. Like the issue is whether or not we lose any value on pulling out of
Yes,
this
yes,
contract
yes.
now. It is not a straight legal, like, we have a contract with them until X date. It's,
Sure.
it's if we stop our energy contract with them, we lose
So we
something.
did that from
Does it
contract, we
make
were
sense?
guaranteed a value, and if we
Is
pull
it
that
better,
out,
is it better to, go with something else that gives us a better value? Like, we have to compare the two things that we're left with.
yes.
So it's not a question we can answer yet, right?
Thought that what they provide now, because everything's finished, right? They're just telling us that, hey, you are actually saving the money that we promised you. So they're guaranteeing that, but there's so many years you have to stay with them and say to the state, we're making the money back. But eventually, we could say, we don't want you to do that each year.
Sure,
Yeah.
So we're-
And we can also say that this newer lighting is going to save us more money than that payback is gonna, and it's worth for us to replace it again, which is why EPCs are becoming more frequent, because the technology and the,
And you can
equipment
have
is getting.
two still going on at the same time, like, you could
We
stay
could
with
leave that
Johnson
special.
Yeah, because they're finished with their performance
Right.
contract, it's just verifying each year. So we
Getting
might
the
spend
savings.
like 5,000 a year with them, or 10,000 a year, just to have them analyze our data and look at what was promised.
Yeah.
So they're updating us saying, yes, you are indeed still making money off of this.
You could definitely have
Yeah.
concurrent EPCs, though. You can have an EPC here, an
Right.
EPC there. You
Right.
can take a small project and do it with the architect. You're not beholden to, this is our contract.
Does it give us extra savings to leave the, contract in place with them? Because I'm hearing it costs us
You-
money to leave the contract in place, but what's the benefit of leaving the contract in place if it's?
I don't think we know the answer. I think that's part of this assessment, correct?
Well,
Well,
I'm asking a different piece,
Oh,
to
So if it's
oversimplify,
10,000
like
a
light
year,
bulb
then
X
it's-
is saving us Y dollars. Is there a value to having the actual energy performance contract in place where we pay them to tell us this is how many dollars it's saving? We get a
Right.
benefit at SED from that. Piece of
Exactly,
information.
so at a former district, I got out of the contract, but there was only 4 or 5 years left. So I saved like $40,000 because I knew we already had the savings and we were still continuing the savings. So I'd have to look at that.
Oh, okay.
I think it's okay to stay with them because you can say to the taxpayers, hey, we're still saving money from that, but now we're gonna start something else that's gonna save us even more money, so.
Got it.
I think some of that will come out though in the assessments as well, because you're gonna look at Johnson Controls. Maybe they're even gonna say, we can do even more for you or less for you or whatever, right? So. Okay,
Thank you.
thanks. Anyone else? All right, that's wonderful. I see we're at 9:55 for our meeting, and I know we have to have a hard stop at 10, and I want to open up to community. The two other issues we had were policies, and we can talk about that in January, because it's just a very quick almost nothing thing. And then the universal pre-K, which I was gonna make the suggestion, if you all remember, in October at the Board of Education, or November at the Board of Education, or October with the Board of Education meeting, we discussed that we'd like to take a look at the program from a budgetary sense. We had a presentation from a curricular standpoint. In speaking with Kathy, we talked about moving this discussion to January because our meeting is on January 23rd. We might even have some preliminary state numbers at that time. And also we could bring Dr. Feeney in at the same time to have that curricular budgetary conversation concurrently happening. So if the committee is agreeable to that, we'd like to move that to a January discussion and we'll table the policy as well. Are you guys okay with that? If there are no other questions from the committee, then I'd like to turn to Ms. Malconian, I see is here representing from the board. Ask her if she has any questions about what's been discussed, but she's saying no. And I'm opening up to our two community commenters, and they're shaking their heads saying no also, because it's been such a thrilling meeting, so great. So just to kind of recap at tonight's or tomorrow's meeting, we will give a brief update on the Sands Point Preserve land on our outstanding, but that's an outstanding issue that's still open. Mr. Lamstein will come back. We'll follow up if he would be here for a January or a February meeting. Sounds like our February meeting, which is going to have our financial forecast, as well as an update on the energy performance contract assessment or ESCO assessment. That will happen, and then we will really spend the bulk of our update discussing the STAR exemption or the enhanced exemption that has come. And Ms. O'Hara is going to provide the additional information that we requested.
To the extent.
To the extent that she can.
Governmental entities
Yes.
have made it possible for her to do so.
Exactly, that she can, yes. All the assumptions, we should say, she's going to be provided. And our next meeting is January 23rd at 9 a.m., which hopefully by then, again, we'll have some draft information and can really delve into some state numbers as well. Budget forecasting will be for that period of time. Then everyone's good?
Yeah.
All right, thank you guys, we really appreciate it. Thank you for coming today.
I don't know how to press the button, Julie.